Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our last webinar on business models for automated driving. Today, we will discuss the mobility as a service business model. My name is Frank Werkers. I work as a senior scientist for the Strategic Business Analysis Department of TNO in the Netherlands. And I'm assisted by my colleague, Sri.
Thank you, Frank. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the webinar on MaaS. Today, I will moderate this webinar and facilitate this for Frank's presentation. I will also introduce you to the rules of the webinar. We have kept our webcams on at the moment. We also see a good attendee list who have joined, so that's good. For the sake of connectivity reasons, we will close our webcams in a couple of minutes so that you can enjoy the presentation in a full screen mode. So coming back to the rules, we advise you to keep the microphones and the webcams off, again, for the connectivity sake. We will also do the same, but not our microphones, obviously. We will use the chat for the questions. So if you have any questions to us, especially with regards to understanding of the business model, regarding the explanation, please send us your questions through the chat. We will review them and we will try to answer them in a couple of stages during our presentation. We really appreciate you to following these rules. This will help us to stick to the time and also to organize this webinar smoothly. Now, I will close my webcam. In this presentation, we will be using Mentimeter to ask you some questions and to collect your answers. I hope you are familiar with Mentimeter, but even if not, that's no problem. We are going to practice it now. So please go to menti.com in your browser or in your mobile phone. And once you go there, you will be asked to fill in a code. And please fill in 270580. I repeat, 270580. The first question that you would be asked is, to which stakeholder group do you belong? We already see there are some answers coming in. In this business model, we have listed a couple of stakeholders, and it is quite interesting for us to understand the composition of our audience according to these stakeholders, but also to get used to the Mentimeter. So that's nice. We see a lot of participants responding. I'll give a couple of more seconds. And as we see, the voting is quite diverse. So that's very nice. 13 participants have responded. And we see quite a mix between travelers, MaaS platform providers. Quite nice that you also joined. Data providers, city and regulatory authorities, other modality, transport service providers, very nice, but also other, which we are curious to know. Okay, so let's go back. So in this presentation, we will be sharing one of the 4 L3Pilot business models for stimulating demand in automated driving. In this study of L3Pilot, in this entire project, we, through market scan and through literature study, we identified 4 business models, and we will be presenting one of the business models, which is the MaaS, and it will be presented to you by Frank. In this webinar, we also would like to receive your evaluation, your perspective on this business model. which we will ask you the questions through the Mentimeter again at the end of this webinar. And most importantly, we would like to raise your interest in participating to our subsequent interviews, which we call Expert Talks. Now, these interviews are not recorded. They are completely from your own perspective, and we would really encourage you to join them and to discuss further about this business model. Having said that, now it's time to give the floor back to Frank.
Yes, thank you, Sri, for this introduction. I will start off now by introducing the project and the portfolio of 4 business models before we dive into the mobility as a service business model, and then we will conclude by the evaluation. The L3Pilot project is a very, very large European project. It is focused on piloted driving, automated driving for level 3 automation in personal vehicles. It has a budget of 68 million and it runs for 48 months. We work with 34 partners, among which OEMs, suppliers, research organizations, SMEs, insurer companies, authorities, and different user groups. The project runs in 12 countries, including Austria, Belgium, France, Finland, Germany, Greece, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, and UK. The ambition is to have 1,000 drivers driving in 100 different cars in 10 different countries, and to collect the data and establish the efficacy of the automated driving in various design domains. So I think this is a very impactful project, and we were focusing on business models that would drive the demand for the automated driving cars. In the after studies in industry and literature, we identified 4 basic archetypes of business models that have some relationships to each other. And in the last 3 coffee webinars, we have discussed the Robo-Taxi business model. We have discussed the in-car services business model, and we have discussed the Data Plus platform business model last week. Today, we will focus on the mobility as a service business model. And this screaming figure introduces the value, the intended value of the mobility as a service business model, and it basically promises to integrate all modalities, shared, public, private, and automated, where available, because currently automated driving is not available everywhere, but the domains in which it will be available will increase over time. So the idea is to provide users with an app in which he or she can give out the preferences for using mobility, and then say the engine will select the right modalities for this person given his preferences and subscription. So it's all like seamless. That is the reason why we think this business model is interesting. And specifically for automated driving, it is expected that an automated car can be part of this modality mix, and depending on the functionality and availability, it can increase the share in this modality mix. So that's, for our reasoning, the rationale of looking at this business model. Sri, please explain what we're going to do now.
Thank you, Frank. That was a nice tell-tale. Now, for explaining the business model, probably you are well aware of the traditional business model canvas, but we use a different approach to visualize and to make the business model. So we use the base X approach. We call this as a spider diagram, as you can see. This is basically a service dominant logic. And it really depends on the co-created value. So as you see, the co-created value is the center of the business model, which also means multiple parties work together to create this value. In the diagram in front of you, the spider diagram, we call it, you can see the name of the business model and the value that is co-created in this business model in what is highlighted in number 1. I will follow the numbers so that it is easier to follow for you as well. The second is the user, so that's basically the target group that this business model focuses on. The gray text, which is the user benefit, basically says what is the benefit that the user receives, and number 3 says what is the contributed value of the user to this business model. Number 4 explains the focal organization that is part of this business model. The focal organization will be one of the key organizations which will be instrumental in forming this business model. And further on, the co-creating actor from 5 and all the way up to 12 o'clock are other stakeholders and parties which together contribute and benefit from this business model. Frank will further present the MaaS business model in exactly the same format. Frank?
Yes, thank you, Sri, for introducing this. So in the core of the MaaS business model, we see the value, a seamless on-demand mobility experience. So what the actors in this business model are together creating is a seamless experience given the preferences of the traveler and the available modalities at hand. So the first actor in this business model is the one basically receiving that value, and these are the travelers. So he will get a seamless travel experience and control of that travel. In order to create that, he or she will have to give preferences and also share usage data and, of course, profile and demand for transport. So that's the first contribution. The second actor in this business model is basically the integrator. So that's the MaaS platform provider. And what he contributes to this business model is an integrated multimodal solutions. Being able to plan and book the travels and also to organize for payment from the travelers and also to distribute it to the modality providers, which I will introduce in a bit. The reason for this MaaS platform provider to participate in this business model would be, of course, to get some earnings from that. I immediately introduce 2 types of contributors to this business model. First is the shared automated driving transport service provider. So this company shares a fleet of AD cars into this onto this platform to be used by this mobility as a service platform, and also, of course, by the travelers. The reason for such a company to enter into this game, of course, is to have use of the fleet. This applies also to the various transport service providers, so entering different modalities into the same platform, like bicycles, for instance, or public transport modalities that can complement the AD transport and vice versa. So the reason for participating of these type of companies is also to have a channel for demand of their modalities. What they contribute is a network connection and transport from A to B. The 8 o'clock actor that is contributing to this business model is the fleet operators for various modalities. All these modalities will have to be maintained and kept clean, etc., to be able to participate in this platform, and somebody has got to do it. This can be a third party, and it can be multiple third parties. The reason for such a company to participate would be to get a fee per cleaned car or per running hour, for instance, or driven by customer evaluation. Another very important participant in this business model would be the city and regulatory authorities. The reason for them participating in this business model is to achieve a good traffic flow and reachability of the inner city, and of course safety, because that's quite an important value for a municipality. What this actor has to contribute to the business model is to make sure that the city is accessible and to have a fair playing field. So that might include infrastructure investments there, and also, of course, to provide licenses. Then we have two more actors contributing to this co-created value, and these are data providers or data processors to create an enriched user and mobility data. And these parties would do it based on a service fee, and also telecom companies providing connectivity and security in return for communication fees. Note that all these contributors are roles, and in practice, companies can have multiple roles simultaneously. For instance, the data provider is often combined with another role. But in essence, these are the different roles that we need to have on the table in order to make this business model actually work. That was the explanation of the business model. As already introduced, we have developed this business model in the L3Pilot project, and we have also quite thoroughly evaluated this business model within the consortium. And based on that, we identified some challenges. A few of them I'd like to discuss here with you. Yeah, so as you can see, the sharing of modality, specifically car sharing, is part of this MaaS business model. And our stakeholders indicated that car sharing is currently already problematic. Where do you leave the cars, and what happens with cars that are not clean for the next user to be used? Specifically, if it's fully automated, how can you deal with that? Another challenge identified is that basically automated driving in this business model would be, say, in competition with public transport, and how do we deal with say, public and governmental investments there? That's another observation. It was questioned also, how does this business model deal with rural availability? Because typically service providers focus on urban areas where people are actually willing to pay for such services, and the fee needed to serve rural areas would be too high to deal with. And it was also suggested to include traffic management in this business model, because the MaaS platform provider basically could have a good overview of what is the demand and what is the availability of modalities, as well as the intended routing or suggestions on the intended routing of these modalities and persons. So it makes sense to include traffic management as a control and as a service to the users in here. So that would be like enhancements of this business model. So this is the explanation of the business model. Sri, can you check whether there are questions in the chat and discuss them with me?
Great, indeed. We do have a question. Frank, how many MaaS platform providers could coexist, do you think, in this business model?
Yes, that's a very very good and intriguing question. So I could answer this in multiple ways. On one hand, in a given city, it would make sense to have, say, only one MaaS platform provider giving access to all modalities, and that say single point would give good reasons for optimizing the usage of the modalities. So that would be optimizing. However, in practice, we see that there are multiple MaaS platform providers in a given city. And if you look, for instance, at the case of YourNow, then you see in different cities that there is competition, and in some cases, say they win, and in other cases, they would withdraw from a city because of that competition, and it's hard to grasp the market there. It all really depends on to what extent the underlying modalities are, say, linked exclusively to a platform. So if you have this AD fleet and you would link it to multiple platforms in one city, then the platform provider would basically just be a user portal. So that really depends on that case. In general, I would conclude there would be room for a few. So oligopolistic.
Okay, thank you, Frank. I see some more questions coming in. However, we have to stick to time. So at the end, if we have more time, we will answer these questions. But please keep the questions coming. Now, to evaluate the business model, we are asking you to go back to the Mentimeter. I hope you haven't closed your browser, but if you have, please open it once again and enter the code 270580. 270580. And the first question that you get there is to evaluate the MaaS business model. We are asking you 4 questions. So the first one is, the business model is definitely feasible, which means we can actually do it. The second question is, the business model is definitely viable, which means we don't go broke. This can be answered from 1, which means you strongly disagree with the statement, to 5, which means you strongly agree to the statement. The third question is, the business model is definitely desirable, which means the people want it. There is enough demand that drives the business model. And the fourth question, my organization is definitely interested in participating in this business model. We see participants answering. I'll give a couple of more seconds, about 20 seconds. Okay, so regards to feasibility, we see that the answer seems to be quite feasible. We have an average score of 3.6, which means yes, we can actually do it. With regards to viability, there is a little bit on the uncertain area. So there are some doubts regarding this particular viability of the business model. The desirability of the business model definitely has the highest rating so far, so the people definitely want it. That's good to see. And the fourth question, my organization is definitely interested in participating in this business model. We see about half of the participants having answered maybe. So that is nice. And we go on to the next question. It is an open question. What are the weak points of the MaaS business model, and what improvements would you suggest? Please take your time. We have a couple of minutes here. The weak points and the improvements of the MaaS business model. So we have the first one. The cost to consumer is increased via a platform when they can go direct to service provider. I'm going to read a couple. We have quite a few. Price for data, willingness to share data of some stakeholders. I believe that is one of the weak points probably. More specific customer segmentation, example, employees. If that is an improvement, I believe, or a weak point.
Yeah, I think you can say configure this business model with more specific modalities and subscriptions, for instance, directed at a group of employees in order to provide for their mobility.
Great. We also have scalability will be challenging as it requires a custom approach to each city/country.
Yes.
Frank, do you have something to say?
Yes, this is definitely what we see currently already in practice. So different cities having different, say, regulations, different data, providing different public transport providers, and the MaaS platform provider would have to configure his proposition basically to each city, given that. And that's quite cumbersome to, I think, to create this coherence in cities, and it goes really city by city.
Right. And we do have a few more questions coming in, or comments. Difficulties in engaging transport providers, particularly public transport and established car sharing companies. It is a universal problem. We also see partly a match with another weak point or an improvement.
Mm-hmm.
In order to stick to the time, we acknowledge these questions, and we definitely invite you to participate with the expert interviews where we can have further discussions on these kind of questions. So if you're interested in participating in an expert interview with us, please leave your name, your phone number, only for your planning purposes, and your email address, please, so that we can contact you to organize an interview session so that we can dive in deeper into this. Further to close, thank you very much for your participation. And this is one of the final webinars that we have conducted as a part of the 4 webinar series. Thank you very much for joining. And Frank, any last words?
Yes, also from my end, very much thank you for attending the webinar, and maybe also if you attended the previous webinars. I hope they were entertaining, and I hope even more that some of you are willing to participate in this more in-depth interviews. I think there's a lot to be said and to discuss about this MaaS platform, specifically in relation to automated driving. So I urgently persuade you to participate in those and provide your details on that. You can pass this invitation also on to any colleagues that might be interested. So for now, thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.